My name is Brother Logan M. Isaac, and in this video I'm going to talk about Representative Mike Levin of California and his history of ignoring veteran employment discrimination since almost as soon as he took office in 2019. So in 1974, there was a law passed that has come to be known as the Vietnam-era Veterans Readjustment and Assistance Act, or VEVRAA for short. And the law is in Title 38 of the U.S. Code, Section 4212, and I'm interested in particular in their reporting requirements, which is outlined here in subsection C. On the right-hand side, you can see I've pulled it straight out of the congressional record, and I've underlined the same things I've highlighted here. Veterans are supposed to be able to file complaints under VEVRAA, and the Secretary of Labor is required by law, by this subsection, to report on the number of complaints filed by veterans, the actions taken by the department, and the resolutions provided by the department. So as early as 2012, I've been able to find these reports and the number of complaints that they've reported on. You'll notice that from 2012 to 2017, the only thing that they are reporting on is the number. They're not reporting on the actions or the resolutions. And it's also noteworthy that the number is relatively stable between 50 and 60 until 2017, when the number jumps from 53 in 16 to 124 in fiscal year 2017. Now I don't know why that number jumped, but the fiscal year is important because the fiscal year 17 there at the bottom would have been published and released in the year 2018. Right before Representative Mike Levin takes office. In January, on the 3rd of January in 2019, Mike Levin is sworn into the House of Representatives. He is assigned to, among other things, the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and he's awarded the chairmanship of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, which you can see here. The Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity has legislative, oversight, and investigative jurisdiction over the education of veterans, employment, and training of veterans. The full VA committee is chaired by Mark Takano, and it's important to point out that neither Mark Takano nor Mike Levin have any military service of their own. So they're civilians making decisions that affect veterans that then they won't feel the consequences of. And that will be important as we talk about what some of the report should be reporting in and the story that data would disclose if they had it correct. So starting in May of 2019, just 4 months into his freshman term, I contacted him. I was living in Maryland at the time. He was not my representative, but he was and remains the chair of the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee under HVAC. And I asked very early on about these reports, not knowing that his subcommittee might be the primary body that it was transmitted to. But I'd asked that it seems like there's some information missing. They're only reporting on the number, but I want to know, and they're required to report on the actions and resolutions. One of his staff members, Faith Williams, responded quickly, saying that they'll bring it to the committee's attention. I hadn't heard anything within a couple of days, and so I followed up on May 20th and still had heard nothing. Then in July of 2019, on the 26th, Mike Levin was on a panel hosted by the American Enterprise Institute and partnered with Brad Wenstrup, a representative out of Ohio, a Republican representative who has had military service, and they were talking about veterans issues and something that they wanted to do around veterans opportunity. And so in a moment, I'll play the video, and I'll also highlight my question to Mike Levin on C-SPAN and also his response before proceeding on the slideshow. Before any Fourth Administration stands up under the Vet Op Act, would you be willing and able to hold a hearing underneath in your committee, the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee under HVAC, to look into how to consolidate and expand and strengthen those civil rights that do exist for soldiers and veterans? And secondly, would either of you or both of you be willing to sign open letters to federal agencies holding into account for those civil rights laws for soldiers and veterans that they are not enforcing or do not seem to know about?
Well, I want to thank you, first of all, for your service and for asking that. I'd be happy to work with our committee staff and talk about the hearing schedule that we have coming up. I know we have a August field hearing, and then I'm sure we'll have plenty more opportunities throughout the session, and I'd be happy to work with you. And somewhere in here is Faith Williams from my personal office. There she is in the back. I don't think Justin is here from HVAC, who kind of helps manage the calendar, but we'd be happy to speak with you about that because I think it's an important concern. And I'm sure that you would love having a hearing on implementation of the VEVRAA Act. The second question, I'd be happy to look at that, and if you could circle up with Faith before we go this morning, I'd be happy to follow up.
So the second thing he had mentioned, it's related but distinct. There's a letter sent by David Trone to Attorney General Barr and FBI Director Christopher Wray about failing to enforce hate crimes protections for service members, which Mike Levin never signed, even though he represents Camp Pendleton, has and still will. So sometime in the fall of 2019, no later than August 18th of 2019, 7 months into Levin's term, the fiscal year 2018 DOL Vets report was sent to Congress. And his committee must have seen it if they weren't the committee that this report went to. And in this report, just as with many others, it claims compliance with 4212C. You can see that in the upper left on page 5, as well as a URL where you can find this report yourself. On the right, I've copied straight out of the congressional record these three things that they're supposed to include: the number, actions, and resolutions. And as you can see on page 21 of the fiscal year 18 report, only the number of complaints is reported. No actions, no resolutions. And Levin would have received this or would have been responsible for knowing about this as the chairperson of the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee under HVAC. So later in the year, I continued to ask and follow up on that AEI panel where he said he would be willing to consider a hearing. I asked with the subject line, HVAC EO hearing, on November 1st, just a few days before Veterans Day. I hadn't heard anything, and so I emailed again on December 6th with a copy of that letter that Mike Levin's office didn't sign, that came out of Trone's office, asking about hate crimes, failing to protect service members from hate crimes. And the staffer I have been in touch with from the get-go is Faith Williams, who you saw in the video there on the left in red. Then COVID came in 2020, but sometime in September of 2020, the fiscal year 19 report came out. And yet again, only the number is included on page 20 of the report, and even though on page 5, the report falsely claims to be compliant with 4212 subsection C. This is the second report that Mike Levin's office would have seen that would have been false, that he would have been aware of based on the information I was providing. The following year, once again, this was published sometime in October of 2021, the fiscal year 2020 report. And I had also, in tandem with my email with Levin's office, I was also pressuring the Department of Labor itself, the compliance director, William Torrens, and the chief investigator, Robert Shepard. And I can only assume as a result of that pressure I applied directly to the agents in charge. Miraculously, the fiscal year 2020 report is the first in 9 years, to include not just the number of complaints, but the actions and the resolutions. You can see there's a table on page 18 of that report, and I consider that a success. Then, just a few weeks before recording this video, sometime in November of 2022, the fiscal year 2021 report came out. Again, Mike Levin was in office. He was the chair of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, and this report claims to be in compliance with 4212C on page 5. However, on page 28, you can see that the fiscal year 2021 report excluded any and all requirements that the Labor Department and Mike Levin's office would have known was statutorily required by federal law. I mentioned this to Levin, but it appears that for some time, either only the 2021 report or the 18 and 19 reports, that Levin has been accepting false reports to Congress from the Department of Labor. I don't know why, but it does appear that he knew, based on the information I was providing him, that the Labor Department was not meeting its statutory obligations under 4212C. So you might be asking yourself, why do I care so much? Well, first of all, the story that data would tell, if it were being accurately reported, is that 807 complaints have come in from veterans over the last 21 years. That's 38 complaints from veterans every single fiscal year. 38, more than one every month. Veterans making complaints under VEVRAA make up the largest investigative caseload for the Labor Department. No statutorily protected community is making more complaints. And in the military, we know that you're supposed to shut up and drive on. So that veterans are overcoming that stigma of shutting up and driving on, learning that they are protected, and then also making complaints speaks volumes as to the scope of the problem. And just to make matters even worse, VEVRAA only protects about 80% of the military community, the veteran community. It excludes from its protections any peacetime veterans without service-connected disabilities. That's 20% of the veteran population that it doesn't include. So in almost every metric, this is a big deal. No other group has a higher caseload with the Labor Department, and it's not even protecting the entire community. During the same time, from 2000 to 2020, no other group was denied their claims more frequently than veterans. You can see here they have their complaints returned a finding of merit less than 8% of the time. Less than 8 out of 100 veterans are being told that their complaints have merit, that what they have complained about is true. That is statistically significant. Veterans are trying to claim the rights that they should have as defenders of democracy, but no other group in the DOL is being denied that same right more than veterans. So how do I know and why do I care? Well, I was one of those 807 veterans in the last 21 years to file a complaint under VEVRAA. On September 13th, 2016, after a failed internal investigation had been triggered at Duke University, I turned to the Department of Labor and I opened up the case number 100201831. I was concerned that I was being treated differently because I'm a veteran and I'm seen as less than fully qualified. And there were also ongoing other incidents that exposed me to increased scrutiny and have created a hostile work environment. This was in September of 2016. There's so little concern for facts and accountability by the Department of Labor that quote-unquote investigations can be little more than checking the box, making veteran civil rights worth less than the ink and paper they're printed on. If you want an example, take just one anecdote from my own complaint against Duke University. Just a few months before I filed my complaint, the university had this harassment policy on the books. It's not the entire policy, it's just the front page and the first paragraph. And you can see it was last updated in June of 2016, just a few months before I filed, putting Duke under federal investigation. Then after I filed, once Duke was under investigation, which they fought with the help of an anti-labor law firm, the university quietly updated their harassment policy to include veteran status. The only change that occurred on November 7th, and that was 3 months into their investigation and almost 7 or 8 or 9 months before the investigation was concluded. When I brought this to the attention of the Department of Labor, after I brought this to their attention, I was then told that my complaints lacked sufficient evidence. I cited this instance as well as 2 pages of other instances in which the United States Code and the Code of Federal Regulations were violated. And I even spoke with the Solicitor General at the Department of Labor, and at every turn, my request for civil rights and equal representation under the law was denied. So, Mike Levin's history of ignoring veteran employment discrimination is a long one, At almost every opportunity he's had to make a change, he's walked away. And most recently, he has accused me without any evidence of being disrespectful to his staff, of ignoring or making him feel uncomfortable or his staff uncomfortable, and trying to make it seem like I'm the problem and not this rampant discrimination and harassment against veterans. And I think that's unacceptable, and I hope you will too. And I hope that you'll reach out to Mike Levin, Mark Takano, and other congressional Democrats and Republicans to make sure that veteran employment discrimination ends.